This episode of the School of Laughs podcast is brought to you by Patreon supporter Maria Tucker. If you'd like to find out how you can support the podcast through a small monthly donation, visit schooloflaughs.com/PATREON. Thanks, Maria.
Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast, brought to you by schooloflaughs.com. Whether you're an aspiring comedian, a part-time pro, or a speaker who wants to become funnier, this is the podcast for you. We'll break down tools, tips, and techniques to help you get bigger, better, and more bookable. And now, here's the show.
Welcome to the podcast. Rick Roberts here. I've got an interview today with Leslie Norris Townsend. If you don't know about Leslie, she's a very funny lady. Went from being a beauty queen back in the day to help pay the bills after her parents passed away in her teen years, and developed her comedy chops, got invited to perform at Disney, was offered a contract by Disney, had to turn that down to go back to college, and then eventually she wound up in Los Angeles where she did an improv workshop and met all kinds of funny people, names you'd recognize like Wrinkler, Ray Liotta, Bryan Cranston, Jack Lemmon, Jimmy Brogan, and then how that group got her the courage to go out and audition for Star Search. And we talk about that Star Search journey and how she plotted out her sets, made sure she had strong material throughout the entire audition and in the actual contest, and how some of the other contestants in the contest wanted to split the prize money even before the finals because they thought she might be winning it and they wanted to cut. Very interesting story. We'll get to that in just a second. I do want to tell you, next week on the podcast, we're going to be going over our goals for 2017. And if you weren't around last year listening to the podcast at this time, I like to do this every year. And I've put together a goals tracker worksheet. It's actually pretty in-depth. And I'm going to be going through that on next week's podcast. And you can get a copy of that if you sign up for the Insider Tips newsletter. And all you have to do to be on that list is shoot me an email, schooloflaughs@gmail.com, and in the subject line put Insider Tip Sheet /Goals Tracker. And I'll make sure I get this goals tracker sheet before the podcast airs next week so you can follow along during the podcast and look at your own worksheet and maybe fill out some goals for yourself for 2017. So again, to get that goals tracker worksheet ahead of the podcast, go ahead and send me an email, schooloflaughs@gmail.com, put Insider Tip Sheet and Goals Tracker in the subject line. That'll automatically enroll you in the monthly Insider Tip newsletter, and I'll send you this Goals Tracker worksheet as well. If you're listening to this podcast, after launch date, 3 or 4 months, or even a year down the line, go ahead and shoot me that email anyway, and I'll get that Goals Tracker worksheet to you so you have it. Cover over 40 different areas where you might have different goals. We take inventory of where we're at now so we can check back and see if we grew anything in the next year, whether it's business, how many jokes we had, how much time on stage, all kinds of great stuff. So shoot me that email. All right, let's get into this week's interview with Leslie Norris Townsend. Well, I'm here with Leslie. How's it going, ma'am?
Fantastic. I'm so excited to not be on the farm. Are you kidding?
I know, all the way
I get to talk to a person.
The farm in Ohio is a whole different ball of wax, isn't it?
It is. It certainly is. You just give laughs to the animals, cows, chickens,
right.
Corn, whatever.
Yeah.
So a human being is fabulous to talk to.
This is going to be a whole different day for you. First time I'm trying to think. The first time I met you was probably
I hired you for a job, I think, for Helena Grain.
Yeah.
Grain, and I had done the gig. I was living up in Ohio, and I was kind of booking a little bit. And then she called me again, and I knew you had done the Fight for Life thing. And, of course, anybody in rural America is probably goes bonkers for that. So it's such you're just an easy sell.
Oh, thanks.
You're
That's good to know.
Sell. So I just pitched you, and then you came down, and you were so funny.
Oh, thank you. That was a fun.
But you're so professional. And that is the key to doing stand-up. You got to marry the show to the business. And that's why you are probably way more successful than me.
No, well, you had the gig first. So
well, yes.
I was riding your coattails, lady. That was funny. So I remember doing that, and I remember it was kind of wintry time, maybe right before
freezing.
Christmas. It was very cold.
And it was icy.
And but I remember the gig was good, the food was good.
The food is always good, because people in the Midwest, they just want the food, really.
Oh, it's sugar, butter, and salt all day
yes,
long. It
and
was really good.
Fried, and bland.
But you had done in the Hollywood thing, the Star Search.
I started my stand-up career in Hollywood.
So tell me about the very first step? Like, when did you want to go somewhere and do stand-up and be funny? So I know you wanted to be an actress as well. So
I
did you do
was
some
a
comedic
beauty
parts?
queen. I am truly the fish out of water. I did not pick stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy picked me. I don't think women, we were talking about how men, there's so few women doing stand-up. Well, I think it's because the lifestyle and the whole deal of it is so different from what a woman would be attracted to. And I was such a prissy beauty queen. I did beauty queens to pay for my college education because my parents had died when I was a teenager.
Really?
Like a young teenager. I had 3 children, and my sisters and brothers had one older brother, but the 2 being back of me were in tow. So I had to work. And when I was in college, I was at Berry College in Rome, Georgia, and I was 18 years old, and I had a theater scholarship. And there was a pageant, and they would pay for my next tuition, so I entered it because talent was 40%. And the reason why I did stand-up was I had lost the Miss Florida pageant. I had been in the state pageant, and I was working at Disney. Oh, from college in Georgia, Disney picked me up.
Okay.
I sent him a tape. I was 18.
Singing, acting?
No, I was
stand-up?
musical comedy.
Okay.
It was the Hoopty Do Review at Disney World. It was brand new, and they had started as a college thing. 10,000 people auditioned, and 4 women were selected.
Wow.
And I was selected, and some of it was improvised. So we were also writing jokes, but who knew you were writing jokes
Right.
when you're just in the play? You know, you rehearse for 3 weeks and then you get on. And it was just for the summer. It was just, and then I got paid, and I got college credit also for it. So that's how I kind of started the comedy, because I was picked as the comedian on it. And it was just such a big hit when we opened. Disney started making money immediately. It was just a huge hit. So after the 3 months there, they offered me a full-time job with Disney Production. But I had to sign for 5 years. But I wanted to go back to college because I was just 18. You know, I was just a kid. So I went back to college the next year. And that year, my mother had been sick. So that year, my mother dies, right? So I did the pageants, and I became first runner-up to Miss Georgia. So after that year, I went to, the Hoopty Do offered me more money to come back to Orlando. So then while I was doing that at night, I went to college in the daytime in Orlando, and I became Miss Orlando because I needed the money because my mother was dead now, and my father was drinking heavily. So I had to figure out the money thing. Right. So then I went to Miss Florida and became first runner-up, so I didn't win. So I'm the loser. From the loss came the stand-up.
Gotcha.
That's what happened. And then Disney offered me a deal at Disneyland. So I would open up the Coke Pavilion, and I'd be in the Kids of the Kingdom, and I did all, you know, I was always kind of swing because I never was great at anything, but I was great at auditioning. So the point is when I went back to L.A., I lived in Anaheim, and during that, I auditioned for the Paramount Studios improv group called the Harvey Lembeck Improvisational Workshop. And who was in the class? Jimmy Brogan, Chris Lemmon, Jack Lemmon would come in, Henry Winkler, Bryan Cranston sat right next to me for years. I was in the improv group for 5 years.
Wow.
Great at improvisation. What a talent.
Yeah.
Who knew he was going to be this huge star? Ray Liotta was in my class. So the boom of the stand-up was happening at the same time. So my teacher in the class, which was Harvey Lembeck, you know who he was?
Yes.
Harvey Lembeck said to me when I did this character called the Miss America character.
Right.
And the Miss America character was the girl that lost, the bitter beauty queen. So my teacher says to me, you need to go down to the Improv and do open mic on Melrose. The Improv on Melrose. What did I know? I never been to a comedy show.
Right. So you're going down there as the Miss America character.
So I go in, well, I always had this rip-away thing, which I had the one-piece swimsuit, the banner, and I played the saxophone at the end. You know.
Great.
That was my talent. So I did it, and, like, everything changed for me. Everybody was coming up, oh, do you have an agent? Because they had never seen anything like this.
Right.
And it was just I did the girl that beat me, really. But nobody knows that, but that's who I did. And I made fun of her. Who knew?
But we're not done with you yet, because you, through the agent showcase and all stuff, how did you get from there to the Star Search show?
I auditioned for 6 years to be on the Star Search, and I had an agent at the time. So I go down. It was Improv at Melrose, and it's a very industry crowd, which means that they're not going to really.
They're not
laugh.
going to laugh. They're analyzing. They're making
analyzed.
decisions.
They're like comics watching comics. So I went on. I did 2 minutes. I had 2 minutes on the audition, and what I did was, I did a setup and then got 4 tags. So I was the dumb blonde. I was blonde back then too. So and my voice is just. It is what it is.
Right. So you do that, and the response is really good.
Oh, it's just kills every time. And you know what else I did on Star Search? I had 6 sets. Oh, if you do Last Comic Standing, you better have your 10 sets ready. And I went backwards. I started with my worst.
I started with your worst and built up.
Because on Star Search, every week you would come against their best.
Right.
Comics.
Right.
So I was worried about going up against Bob Zaney and so I wanted the best last.
Yeah. Saved your hand grenade. That's
which
what I call
is hard. You must, it was it might have not worked. I mean, it is risky.
It takes discipline.
It's risky, and you must be so into that you can do it. Because it's very nerve-wracking. So I won the first one, which was just surreal, because
you're like, finally, I get a victory.
Yeah, I get a victory. So I win the first one. Then I go up the second one. So every week you had to come up with a new 90 seconds. So I had it all ready. I was all ready. And my agent was worried about me. So now I win them all. And then I go to the semifinals. Now I'm thinking, this is it. This is the moment. God has allowed me. I mean, every time I would win, tears would just come down my face. I thought, and I was really praying a lot during that time, even though I hadn't really been that evangelical. But I was praying, thank you, Lord, that you're going to allow me to have this moment.
Right.
I knew there was a reason why I came in second all that time. How could you win 6 of them? Then I win the semifinals. So before the and then they had the second half. And so the other person wins the other half. So I was in the first half of the season.
Gotcha. Then you go head-to-head at the end.
So then they have the 2 winners of the 2 semifinals go head-to-head. So, right. So now I win the whole first half. Now the second half, and I got $1,000 a show. That's what I got. But the winner got $100,000.
Right. I remember it was a big deal.
So right before, it was Felicia Michaels and Bob Zaney were up against each other at the end of her half.
On the other side.
So they called the agent up, right? And Bob Zaney hadn't won his half. So he was going up against Felicia for her half. And then the next one would be the winner of the semifinals, on the B semifinals. So how did that work? He calls me up. He says, I want to do a deal. I want to split it 3 ways. I want to split the $100,000 3 ways. And before I do the show with Felicia, I want you to sign something, and so we'll all come out with $33,000. Well, you know me.
Yeah.
Hey, so what do you think I said? I say to Bob, I said, wait a minute, I already won my half. Why should I do that when you haven't even won against? I said, we'll talk about it after. So I wouldn't do the deal. Because in my heart and soul, I thought, I'm going to win this thing.
Right.
I have paid my dues, right? So he goes up against Felicia, and she beats him. So he's bumped. So now it's her is going to go against me. Her agent calls my agent and says, we want to split the thing. Because, see, they knew I was going to win. Because I was funny. I had better jokes. And so her agent calls my agent, and so Bruce Smith from Omnipop calls me up and says, they want to split it. He says, what do you want to do? And I said, well, what do you want to do? He says, well, it's up to you. He says, $50,000 is a lot of money. So you know me, I just said, she knows I'm going to win. I said, this is mine. You tell them to move out of the way. We're not there for the bronze medal. We're there for the gold medal. And I could hear him, kind of on the other end, kind of be upset because, there goes his $10,000, his sure thing $10,000.
Right, bird in the hand.
And he couldn't believe it, so he says, if that's what you want, I'm with you all the way. We got to the show, and I was a little worried because they wanted to put me first. So I didn't follow any comics. I was the opener. But even still, I was a little worried because I had to break the ice. So I knew in my heart, I just said, what would Bette Midler do? And I know it's mine. So I go out there and I kill. I did kill. And then she comes out and she kills. Then at the end of the show, there we are, both of us, and there's Ed McMahon. You know, he'd open up that envelope just like in a beauty pageant. And I remember in those beauty pageants, I'd watch the lips. I'd watch his lips.
To say your name.
Like I wait for him to say Leslie, because every week he would open up that envelope and say, right. And I just knew that he would open up the envelope, and he opens up the envelope and he says, Felicia. Well, you might as well just... That was probably the worst moment of my whole life. That's one of those moments that they stay, even to this day, it's 22 years later. I mean, I can remember the moment. It's like somebody shot me in the gut. I hunched over. I cried I turned around because you hear the music. Da, 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 and it starts to go in slow motion. Da, 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 da. And then the people like went, I mean, you could tell I should have won. Because you could hear the audience response, and like you could see their faces. You remember in the movie Rocky where their faces get grotesque, right. And it goes into slow motion, and you can see the sweat come off of the brow, and that's what it was like. I turned around, and in slow motion, I'm bawling, and I'm crying so hard that my eyes I went off stage, and I could hear in the background, and here's your the $100,000. And all I could think is, how could God let this happen to me? You know what? How wrong? I never cursed, so I wouldn't have cursed God. But it was not pretty. It was not a pretty sight in my dressing room, because there were my girlfriends and there was my agent, and we just cried like babies.
Yeah.
It was just an awful moment.
It's like, what did you learn out of that?
Everything, because I thought, if you really believe in who you are, you take risks, and sometimes you win, and who knew better than me than to lose? It was my third time, 3 strikes, you're out. But I didn't think that. I just got back up again, and, it was hard. It took me a while. And, of course, I kept working. And the end result was 20 years later, my kid wants to go to college, and I'm living on a farm in Ohio. And my big boy wanted to go to college, and of course it's $100,000 to go to college. And I say to him, you just do the work. Don't worry about the money. The money will come. And in your head, you're a dad. In your head you're thinking, how am I going to come up with this money? And I get a call from Ohio State, and they say we want to give your son a scholarship. And I say, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. He says, we want to give him $25,000. And I said, oh, thank you. He said, no, wait a minute, Mrs. Townsend. We want to give him $25,000 for 4 years. We want to give him $100,000. I mean, Rick, I dropped the phone. All I could hear was the phone was da-da-da-da-da. Da. And I heard him yelling out, Leslie. So you see, God was waiting to give me the $100,000. When I needed it way more than I needed it as a 25-year-old. I needed it for my kid to go to college. So you see, sometimes you don't know why those doors close. But you have to accept and move on. And that's like telling a joke if you're a stand-up. Even, you go on stage and stand-up is, you've got to try a new joke out. Like I tried a new joke out last week. I was up in Chicago, and I almost thought it was like I won Star Search, that they all applauded it, the joke, because it just was one line, and that you're constantly or you do a joke and they don't get it, or they don't laugh, or it's a new joke. No matter who you are as a stand-up, you must always be writing new material. It's all a process.
It never ends. It keeps going. That's the fun of it.
I need to write a book about it. I really do need to write a book, but I don't type.
Well, Leslie, thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing the stories. Lots of encouraging stuff.
Was it interesting or was it boring?
It was fascinating.
Really?
Yeah, I can't wait to go back and listen to it.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, let's go grab some lunch.
Much. Okay.
Well, there you go. Short and sweet, but packed full of information and inspiration. I thought Leslie, very funny lady. You can find out more about her. I've got links to her website and some videos on the schooloflaughs.com website, so check that out. Hey, don't forget to request the Goals Tracker worksheet so you can follow along with next week's podcast as we set goals for 2017. Simply shoot an email to schooloflaughs@gmail.com. Put Insider Tip Sheet /Goals Tracker in the subject line. I'll get that to you so you can participate in the podcast, kind of make it interactive next week. Hey, an iTunes review came in. Thank you very much for doing those. I still would love to get to 100 reviews before the end of the year. That was one of my goals for this year, and we're 9 shy. So if you thought about leaving an iTunes review, help me out. Help a brother out. Leave one. If you don't know how to do it, shoot me an email. I'll send you a little tutorial so you can figure it out a lot easier. This one comes in from John Feltz on December 8th, 2016. It says, Rick's podcast has been essential in motivating me to further my comedy career and push the boundaries in all areas. I have already implemented the tips and techniques into my recent performances and seen a real difference. I have also been able to expand on the business side, making my content available in many more ways than before. Whether he's got a guest on who shares mistakes we can learn from, or a pro who shows us what we can avoid, or just ways to make sure we get the most out of comedy dollars we spend, Rick's podcast is a great companion to have on this comedy journey. 5 stars for sure. Hey, thanks, John. I appreciate you listening, and I always appreciate your emails and messages, and I can tell you're out there hustling, trying to do the right thing the right way, and happy to be part of that comedy journey. That's going to wrap it up for this week. Make sure you tune in next week as we track our goals for 2017. In the meantime, be careful out there. Be careful Christmas shopping. And watch for those kids doing bottle flips. If one more kid flips a water bottle on the plane behind me sitting down on the stupid seat back, I'm going to turn around and punch him. Okay, that's something I've got to deal with. I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to the School of Laughs podcast. If you'd like to hear more School of Laughs podcasts, you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For information on upcoming live and online classes, visit schooloflaughs.com. Until next time, stay tuned, stay focused, and stay funny.